keynote is Achieving Citizen Empowerment in a Time of COVID inside Ireland's Citizens Assembly on Gender Equality. As you know, in recent years, Ireland has come to be seen as a leader in deliberative democracy. Something I never thought I'd hear myself say, incidentally. I think it's really, really exciting. The 2013-2014 Constitutional Convention, followed by 2 Citizens Assemblies in 2016 to 2018 and 2020 to 2021, show the value of gathering a group of randomly chosen citizens together as part of a 3-stage process: learning, deliberation, and decision-making with a view to reaching conclusions about a particular topic or topics. I would be very happy to ask Dr. Mary-Clare to start sharing her screen now in a moment. I have to say to everybody that I hope you're okay, that this session is going to be recorded, and yeah, we've got some fun stuff ahead for you. All yours. Take it away.
Okay, so just check everybody can hear me first of all. Yes, all good. Yeah, great. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Anne for the invitation to speak to you this evening. I know some of you have been involved in events for the day, so I'm conscious I'm probably keeping you from your dinner or whatever, so I'm hoping that maybe we'll have a bit less of me talking and a bit more interaction. We'll have a bit of a video in the middle as well, so really looking forward to the opportunity. So as Anne said, the title is about my time as Secretary to the Citizens Assembly on Gender Equality. It turned out to be a slightly different experience than I was expecting because COVID was unleashed on us in the middle, but that gave us the opportunity for some interesting innovation, which we'll talk about later on. So as Anne mentioned, Ireland's Citizens Assemblies have been, something that we've become known for. What I'm going to do first of all is just talk a little bit about deliberative democracy and its use in Ireland so far. I'm not going to focus much in the previous assemblies because I wasn't involved in those, but they are quite relevant because we kind of based, what we did in the 3rd Assembly on Ireland's previous exercises. Then I'm just going to talk about the establishment of our own Citizens Assembly on Gender Equality and what was the job we were given to do, how did we set it up. As I said, I'll talk a little bit about the fact that we had to move online unexpectedly. I talk a bit about the outcome and the next steps that are being followed. And actually, some of you may have seen that over the weekend, the next 2 Citizens Assemblies just had their inaugural meeting. So I'll just say a little bit about those. So Ireland's Citizens Assemblies are an example of deliberative, they've sometimes been called deliberative mini publics. They're panels of randomly selected citizens and they're tasked to make recommendations about public policies or about law. And their development can be traced over time, but I think the current wave and probably the Irish model dates back to around 2004, where in Canada, British Columbia introduced a Citizens Assembly to seek citizens' views on their new electoral system. And that seems to have signaled a kind of a whole wave of interest in that. And some academics in Ireland picked up on that and began a kind of a pilot process that ultimately fed into our establishment in Ireland. So Ireland is one of a number of countries applying the model now. We've been described by some of the academics in this as a truly unique case. And I think that's partly because we've held quite high profile national assemblies in quick succession. But also, as you may know, some of these have produced quite significant political outcomes, particularly in a social sphere through successful referendums on both marriage equality and the 8th Amendment, and that got a lot of international attention. So we had 2 to date before our current one that I'm going to speak on gender equality. The 2011 programme for government provided for a constitutional convention which operated between 2013 and 2014, and it did exactly what it said in the tin, in that it looked at constitutional issues specifically, unlike the later assemblies, and it was the one that looked at marriage equality. The other way it was different from the one I was working on, there was actually 33 politicians on it, as well as 66 citizens, so it was a mix of citizens and politicians. And then there was an independent chair, that was Tom Arnold. The next assembly was called the same as ours, the Citizens Assembly. And it looked at a number of different topics. It looked at the 8th Amendment, but it also looked at climate change, at aging, and it looked as well as a couple of sort of less high profile electoral issues. Our assembly, though, was a bit different. It was a single assembly to look at just one topic, which was gender equality, and I'll talk about the topic a bit later on. We again had only 99 citizens, no politicians involved, but we did learn a lot from the previous models, and I'll talk about that later on. So really, in a nutshell, what these assemblies do is they allow a representative group of citizens to delve more deeply, I suppose, into a policy issue than they'd usually have a chance to do, and to inform them about the facts and the data. Also then, and probably this is what's called the secret sauce of the process, to discuss with other citizens the topic and then develop and vote on recommendations. It's important to say they're not a policy group. It can't be too technocratic. They can't be asked to do calculations or very complex cost benefit analysis, but they can give a view on complex issues once they have information. And I suppose one of the reasons I would think that they have become popular is this idea of kind of democracy or politics kind of, maybe being undermined, people being skeptical about the political system, people feeling disenfranchised and so on. The assemblies are seen as a way of involving people, a kind of a more bottom-up process. And I think that you'll see from later on when we play the video about the views of members, they really do find it a very fulfilling process, which is, I think, one of the reasons it's been such a success. It's important to say, though, that certainly in Ireland, citizens' assemblies are purely consultative, and they're not aiming to take over from the Dáil or take over from the government. The Oireachtas and the government still decide on policy, so this kind of feeds into the policy process. On the other hand, though, I think you can't set up a citizens' assembly and then just leave it, the recommendations sitting on the shelf. That was certainly something that our members were very vociferous that they didn't want to happen. So there is a need to show that for the political system to show responsiveness to the recommendations as well. So as I said, the one I worked on is the Citizens Assembly on Gender Equality. It was established by the Houses of the Oireachtas in July 2019, and it was given an extremely broad mandate. The Oireachtas resolution gave a lot of detail about the way in which it should operate, and I'll allude to that later on, but it also scoped out the topic in quite a lot of detail. So the previous Assembly on Climate Change was simply asked by the Oireachtas for ideas as to how to make Ireland a leader in climate change, whereas we weren't just asked to make Ireland a leader in gender equality. We were asked to look specifically at norms and stereotypes, at leadership, at caregiving and childcare, at pay in the workplace, social protection issues. Now, interestingly enough, when the Assembly was established, the resolution actually didn't specify domestic, sexual and gender-based violence as a topic that should be looked at. But this was something that the members very early on advised also by the expert group felt really should be included because of its importance as a gender equality issue. And I think events that had occurred since then, really reinforce that decision because it was something that the members themselves were very engaged with and exercised by. So it was quite a big challenge to develop a program of work to cover all these topics sufficiently, to inform the members sufficiently that they would feel equipped to make recommendations in the area, while at the same time keeping it to a manageable number of meetings. These are people with everyday lives, with jobs, with caregiving responsibilities, so they didn't have time to just switch off the rest of their life. So there needed to be a kind of a realism as well about the number of meetings, and that had to be reflected even more when we moved online due to COVID. So how did it work then? Well, the assemblies consisted of 99 citizens randomly selected. They had to be entitled to vote at a referendum, and they were selected to be broadly representative on a number of grounds such as gender, age and region, as well as socioeconomic background. Now, actually, we made a few recommendations in the chair in her final report around maybe a new approach to selection, which I'll talk a bit about later on. But the important thing is that members are randomly selected. So essentially what happened was a polling company knocked at the door of a number of randomly selected addresses, and people answered the door and were asked would they like to be on the Citizens Assembly, and you'll see a little bit about that in the video. We had planned to have in-person meetings as they had for the Constitutional Convention and the Citizens Assembly. So what tended to happen there was members would arrive on a Friday evening, have a chance to chat in the evening, and then do their work on Saturday and Sunday morning as well, leaving at lunchtime on Sunday. So it's quite a lot of time for people to invest. But at the same time, it was always really going to be about a day and a half over a weekend. So there was a need to kind of be efficient and be realistic in terms of the program. And our original plan had been for 6 in-person meetings between January 2020 and July 2020. And the way the meetings would tend to be structured is you would have factual presentations from academics and experts, also then presentations from advocacy groups who are interested in the topic, and then personal experience and testimony of people, members of the public directly impacted by the topic. Then the members would move into round tables, typically of around 8 people, where they would discuss the topic, and that would be moderated by professional facilitators. At the beginning of the process, we agreed that members, and the members themselves agreed, more importantly, that they would be guided by some principles in doing their work. And these were very much influenced by the previous assemblies. And these were openness, fairness, equality of voice, respect, collegiality, and efficiency. We were mandated by the Oireachtas to have an expert advisory group to support the chair in the work. So that consisted of 7 experts on various relevant areas, including constitutional law, deliberative democracy, and gender equality. And their role really was to give advice on maybe what areas needed to be covered, what kind of data the members needed. They would review presentations in advance to make sure they were balanced and factual. And they also had some advice and some guidance in relation to speakers. We also had a smaller steering group of the members themselves who were kind of acted as kind of a sounding board and a link between the broader assembly and the secretariat. And it was interesting at the outset, we wanted to have six members of the steering group, 3 men and 3 women from different age profiles and from different parts of the country. So we asked for volunteers, and we had 6 male volunteers and only 2 women. So that in itself at the very outset told us maybe that there were some things we needed to look at in relation to gender equality. So we managed to twist the arm of the 3rd woman, and we did have a balanced steering group. And I think that steering group was a really great resource for us in terms of getting feedback on an ongoing basis from the members. Like the previous assembly, we also engaged independent researchers. And what they did was they analysed the process in terms of its deliberative quality. And they did this by doing surveys of the members before and after each meeting. And they also then produced a final report for the Oireachtas, which kind of just gave a sense of how the process had gone. And that was really valuable for us in terms of seeing how things were going on a between meetings, but also at the end of the process. And it gave some food for thought as well in terms of future assemblies. We also ran a public consultation, and so we engaged an academic, Dr. Pauline Cullen from Maynooth, to analyse the public submissions. There were 246 submissions, 66 of these were from organisations and 180 from individuals. And it was very useful to provide as well that broader link between the members of the public. The members of our assembly were very keen to hear what the submissions had said and what the views were of people on the ground. So our first full weekend session took place in person in February 2020, and this is that meeting. You can see the round tables there, one of our speakers in full flow, and that was the way we had expected it to go for the rest of the process. But then just about a week or so before our next meeting was due to happen, the country shut down due to COVID. So within a few weeks, it became obvious that in-person meetings were unlikely to be allowed for quite some time. We had had some contact with other assemblies that were ongoing at the time, one, for example, in England and one in Australia. They were at quite a different phase than us. They were nearly at the end of their work. And so they pivoted online nearly immediately to get their work over the line. There was another Scottish assembly, which was at a very similar point than us, really only beginning. And like us, they decided to pause for a while, but it was very useful to have those initial conversations. However, once time went on, obviously none of us knew that COVID would still be knocking around at this point in time. But once it became clear that we wouldn't be able to resume imminently, we started to reflect. We felt, given the mandate we were being given the need to kind of influence the policy process in a timely fashion, and also the fact that we gathered these members together, and if the longer time went on, things would crop up for people, they mightn't be able to be a member anymore. We really felt we needed to just explore the possibility of going online. But this is very much a citizen-led process, so it needed to be something that the members themselves were willing to do and comfortable to do. After all, they'd agreed to do this on the basis of a face-to-face meeting. They'd never been asked about technology or whether they were comfortable with it. So we were really asking them to do something quite different than they'd originally signed on the dotted line for. So we thought the best thing to do was to survey all the members. So around about the middle of May of 2020, we did a survey about members' attitude, I suppose, to going online, but also their capacity, both their willingness and, you know, their technical capacity. And we got a very, you know, good, strong level of replies, about 90 replies. So 86% of them said they were willing to participate in an online session, and most of them did have access to broadband and a suitable device. Now, not everybody would have had, you know, laptops. Some people would have been using phones, but they did have smartphones which were suitable for use. However, at that stage, and I suppose this is very much towards the beginning of the pandemic, 24% of them, so a quarter of them, had no experience, had never done a video call before, and 30% or close to 30%, so they were not comfortable using video technology. So we just really had to bear that in mind when we were thinking about our working method. So we made a number of changes then in terms of going online, and we consulted with experts in online learning and the international colleagues who are a bit ahead of us in terms of lessons learned going online. Some of the feedback we got in the survey, we asked the members how long would they be willing to spend online. We gave them different options, and the feedback we got, most people said the most they would be willing to spend sort of locked up in the box room over their weekend was 4 hours. So what we decided to do was run the meeting for 4 hours on a Saturday, generally from 10 to 12 and then from 2 to 4, although the lunch times tended to change. So we were kind of flexible around that depending on how long a break members wanted. Now, this was quite a short period of time, as you can imagine, compared with what we'd envisaged. So the way we used the time was we got all the presentations and all the kind of contributions pre-recorded in advance. So between meetings, say if there was 4 or 5 weeks between meetings, members would get the presentations in little batches. So they might get in the first week 2 videos, the second week 2 videos, and they watched them then in their own time rather than during the meetings. But sometimes we did have some of the guest speakers from those videos on to answer questions and answers in a live session, but generally most of the time of the meetings then was spent in online breakout groups facilitated by the same facilitators that we had used previously. I should just mention as well that before we did go online, the Secretariat ran training on Zoom. Zoom was the platform that, you know, of the people who'd used video calls is the one most people were familiar with. So we had kind of a beginners, intermediate and advanced training, and really the advanced training was just a test to make sure everybody was connecting okay, but that was just done by our own members of the team, and that worked well. We decided though not to jump, although people had said they were willing to have a session online, we decided we wouldn't jump straight into a full meeting online. So what we did was we ran a pilot session, we ran a pilot seminar in July. And what we did was we got some speakers to come along and speak about how they felt the gender equality mandate might have been impacted by COVID. And we also got Pauline to come and speak about the public submissions. And I suppose that gave the members a chance to see how things would be online and gave us a chance to test the technology. And it was a good way of just seeing how realistic it would be to do a full meeting online. So after that, then we sent another survey and we asked members, you know, based on their experience of the seminar, would they be willing to do a full meeting online? And 84% of them said they would. It was kind of interesting then looking afterwards, some of the people who weren't in that 84% actually did end up going online and sticking with it till the end. So once it actually did go online, you know, we really did have a very positive level of engagement. So we decided to resume online, and we had a first meeting then in September. At that stage, we had still hoped that we would be able to resume in person at some stage during the duration of the assembly. I think we had maybe the idea that we'd get to Christmas and then maybe you know, we'd be able to go back in person then in January, but obviously that wasn't possible. So in the end, the assembly completed its work fully online. So we'd met 7 times online in all, and we had our final voting weekend then which took place over a full weekend on the 17th to the 18th of April 2021. One of the things we did was we were conscious that the things citizens would be missing would be the opportunity to feed back to us in a kind of an informal fashion. You know, in person, they would have been able to nab me at the coffee break and tell me if they weren't happy with something, and they'd be able to kind of feed back to the chair if there was something they thought could be improved. So we decided to run some more informal evening meetings over Zoom, where members who just wanted to comment a bit more about the process and give feedback about how it was going could join us in the evening. And that seemed to go well. And I think it gave members the feeling that they weren't just kind of in isolation, but they were actually, there was a strong channel, a link between the Secretariat and also the members themselves. And we also had online voting, and instead of they had done a very kind of a very similar to the national election they had in the previous assemblies. They'd had voting booths, they'd had a returning officer, they had the pen and paper and so on. So we weren't able to do that. So we had to do online voting. And this is a kind of a different setup, as you can see, from everybody crowded around the tables. That was an example of the online meeting. So I'm just going to say a few words then about how we agreed the ballot papers and the voting online. So when members were in their breakout groups at the end of this discussion, they were asked to agree 3 to 5 recommendations that they thought were a priority. We also had a lot of recommendations that individual people proposed in terms of the notes coming out of the breakout groups. We had recommendations speakers had recommended, and we kind of compiled those in a kind of weighted analysis. And we ended up with a very long list of up to 500 recommendations, which I think the Oireachtas would certainly not have thanked us for. So we knew that we needed to whittle those down. So through SurveyMonkey then, and through kind of analysis of what had been the most strongly favoured in the breakout groups and so on, we sent out a ballot, kind of a sample ballot paper to members. And then based on their feedback, we asked them to kind of rank things, rate them, what was most important. And based on their feedback, then we refined the ballot paper further. And then for each topic, we sent out a ballot paper before the meeting. And then the wording of that ballot paper was discussed at the meeting, and the amendments to it were agreed through Zoom polls. We got very familiar with Zoom polls and how many you could have in a meeting and so on. So we had to be quite creative there. So the ballot paper and the constitution was agreed in the February, and there was a legal panel on standby on Zoom to answer questions and to help out and advise on that. And then we agreed our care ballot paper in March, and the rest of the ballot paper was then agreed at the final weekend in April. We had close to 50 amendments proposed at the final weekend, so it wasn't for the faint-hearted. They were all being sent in by email. We were then having to make sure we aggregated them all in, changed them on PowerPoint slides, changed the Zoom polling, and so it was quite an elaborate exercise. And I think the key thing there was I said to the team, look, do everything slowly. If you feel at any time we're under pressure, we have to just do everything very carefully and very slowly. But it worked out. And this meant that members had full ownership of the ballot paper at all stages, and nearly 90% of them said they thought that had worked well in the final surveys. As I mentioned, then we had an online voting system. We procured this, so everybody got a kind of an individual code to vote on their device. It could be done on their phone or on their tablet. And then we did the voting during the final meeting in April as well. And we ended up with 45 recommendations after the voting. So I'm now just going to temporarily pause there and just give a chance for our members to talk about the experience, just to give you a bit of a flavour of the process on a video here.
Well, I think it was a Tuesday afternoon, early in January, and there was a knock at the door.
I never answer the door. My husband is the doorman.
So it was really very random, a Sunday afternoon, I think.
And there was a bearded gentleman there at the door.
And he asked me if I had heard of the Citizens Assembly and would I be interested in serving on it.
Then I said, okay.
The Citizens Assembly on Gender Equality was established to advance gender equality, to make proposals so that gender equality becomes the norm in the Ireland of tomorrow. There is a widespread feeling that the advance of gender equality has stalled in the last 10 years and that it's high time to get it moving again.
I kind of thought this would be very interesting and it will be something, as a citizen, I thought I'd like to do. So I was excited about it, yeah, I was.
I want to make this country better for my child. I want her to have more opportunities.
Well, we had the first meeting in Dublin Castle in January 2020. I found it an inspiring meeting. At that stage, our aim was to open up the issues, get people thinking about them, and then in the discussion groups they started talking about, well, does society have to be like that? Why do we think like that? And we thought it would go on like that for the next 6 months until COVID hit.
COVID landed really with a bang, and I was concerned, that it wouldn't continue, and that it was a lost opportunity.
So then when I got a message from the Citizens Assembly saying, would I be interested in doing it online, and did I know how to use Zoom? Oh, I knew how to use Zoom, so I said, yeah, I'll have a go.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect actually.
The first one was a little bit, there was a few sort of technical issues for others.
It wasn't the same as meeting them face to face, but once we got into the swing of things, and into smaller breakout groups, conversations started to flow again.
Probably where we all felt most at home was when we were put into our breakout groups.
I enjoyed it, and I think everybody was way more reasonable than I expected.
I had a 4-week-old baby, so she was a little bit of a disruption on the first. I think she was introduced to 100 citizens, but look, that's all part of it, and it probably fed into the gender piece, around child-minded and care for children.
Citizen, of course, is central to the Assembly. They are being asked to inform themselves and then to give their views to their political representatives. So they were in charge of the process all the way through. My own role and that of the Secretariat was to help them make it happen, to present them with the facts, to structure the meetings, but it's their voice that matters.
We looked at the Constitution, Bunrock na HÉireann, written in 1937, written in a patriarchy, for a patriarchy.
We had the opportunity to really explore these issues in depth, to debate about them, to think about them, to look at some of the issues that are in the in-between, the grey area.
There were some things I did learn, but there were other things that people learned from me.
As the group progressed and we went through different topics, I come to see that it is actually a bigger issue than I originally imagined.
The more I learned about the topics, the more I felt the need for significant and long-lasting change.
I kind of would have considered myself a feminist, but certainly there has been an awful lot of perspectives that I may not have considered previously.
Until you walk in somebody else's shoes, it's very hard to know what's going on. The Citizens Assembly is an essential idea. It's active citizenship. It's citizens taking responsibility for their country and saying, this is what we want, this is the society that we want.
It was a very, very positive and enlightening and encouraging experience, actually.
I felt kind of proud that I was representing the woman who was told to stay in the home and all this guff that we had to put up with.
I'm proud that I may have in some small way played a part in creating a brighter and more equitable future for my 3 daughters.
People who you've never met before come together, all being passionate about the one thing. It's really, really inspiring.
Restored a bit of faith in humanity.
The advice that we give is going to the Taoiseach. How many people get that opportunity in their lives?
I think what we will see coming out of this particular Citizens Assembly is a very strong call for change. That is definitely the mood of our citizens.
There's a lot of things that need to be changed in this country, and I hope they feel that the recommendations that we give now are valid and reasonable, because we are the citizens and we have worked hard.
Okay, so I think that gives a good flavour of our members, and I suppose in particular of their dedication. So really, as you can see, very dedicated to the process. And just in terms then, I suppose, of the difference between online and in person, it was something we were quite curious about, and it was one of the things that our researchers talked about afterwards. And I think overall, I think nearly everybody concluded that online did work well, maybe better than we might have expected at the outset, particularly because it was a kind of an enforced going online with limited opportunity to prepare. but it wasn't as good as in person. And actually just one of the questions Jane and the team asked in the survey was, if COVID wasn't a factor, would you prefer to have been meeting online, in person, or a hybrid? So there, 66% said fully in person, 29% said a hybrid, and 6% said fully online. Now, the attendance was probably as good, if not better, than in person. I mean, this may be partly because people were locked into their houses at that point in time, so there wasn't much else for them to do. But I'm sure they were, as I said, they were very dedicated, so I'm sure that wasn't all of it. But I mean, there was, I suppose, things that if somebody in a house was sick or something like that, it was a bit easier maybe to meet online than to travel to Dublin. In terms of the pros of online, of course, the travel, in particular for people who were living quite far away from Dublin, was an advantage. One of the things that the researcher in particular picked up on was there was an opportunity for people to reflect in advance in a way they wouldn't in the in-person meetings, because in the in-person meetings, they just heard a presentation and then they were moving straight to the table to discuss it without necessarily the chance maybe to internalize it. Whereas with our model, they were watching the videos, they were sometimes watching them more than once, and they were having an opportunity to kind of process what they'd heard before coming to the meetings. So I think even the researchers' conclusion was that even if you were meeting in person, there's a definite value in providing the information and the data and the perspectives in advance. And it also meant, I suppose, the presentations could be better focused. I mean, we would always have had very good speakers, but if there was, say, a video or a presentation which went on a bit too long, where somebody maybe said something that maybe we considered wasn't quite balanced, we'd a bit more of an opportunity to flex that, to edit it, or to ask somebody maybe in certain situations to re-record. So that was a kind of an advantage as well, instead of the real-time approach. The big disadvantage, I think, was the less, chance to connect informally for members, maybe to get to know each other at the coffee break and to have discussions, outside the structure of the kind of the formal sessions. And it was actually harder work as well for members. They were having to do the hours at home. And I suppose one of the things the researchers said, they didn't really have any of the perks. They were lucky if they got, a biscuit and a cup of coffee, whereas when they would have been in the hotel at the meeting, they would have had meals and they would have had a chance for a bit of social interaction. So really the fact that they stuck with it was absolutely fantastic. So generally, I think the feeling was from both chair, the members, and also the researchers that, in person is better. But there's definitely a potential for a hybrid approach. Just then in terms of the recommendations, I'm not going to go into these in detail, but just to give a flavour, there was recommendations of changes to the Constitution. One of the things that members had been asked to look at was this Article 41.2, the famous Women in the Home clause. It was something that the Constitutional Convention had discussed and decided should be amended, but this hadn't been, for various reasons, actioned. So our members again recommended that it wouldn't be deleted from the Constitution, but again, it should be amended and replaced by an obligation for the state to take reasonable measures to support care in the home and the wider community in a non-gender specific way. Secondly, members recommend that there should be a broader definition of the family in the Constitution than the marital family to kind of meet the current kind of situation of Irish society, I say, in a more relevant way. And then finally, to insert a gender equality and non-discrimination clause in the Constitution. Now, it's important to say this is ultimately a matter for the public. It's a matter for the government as to whether to put any of these to a referendum, and then it would be a matter of the public to vote whether to accept them or not. Other recommendations then, a lot on care, because I think COVID really put a spotlight on care. So better terms and conditions for carers, a publicly funded and regulated childcare model, and to increase the proportion of state spending in childcare from 0.3% to at least 1% over the next decade, which is actually a UNICEF target, and better paid parental leave. There was also a number of recommendations in relation to leadership. I suppose quotas we felt was maybe something that was going to be quite controversial. And it was funny at the beginning, there were people who had strong reservations. But I think in hearing the evidence, the members realized they wanted to see more rapid change than a kind of a slow evolution. And they heard one statistic which said that based on the current trajectory, we wouldn't have full equality in the Dáil until 2063. So I think people began to see that quotas were something maybe that were needed to kind of speed up the process for a certain period of time. They also recommended that there should be gender quotas in relation to getting public funding for things like sports and cultural bodies. I think some members were quite surprised at the low level of women in some of the boards of our main sporting organisations. There was also then a number of recommendations to address sexual, gender-based and domestic violence, and also to support victims and survivors. And then a number of recommendations around implementation. As I said, there's 45 recommendations. They're in the report on the website, so I'm not going to go into any more of them. But I think just a final thing to say about the recommendations, one of the things that the members voted as well, we were conscious that some of these recommendations would perhaps involve the spending of public money. So members also voted in favour of the following, which was, if necessary, we were also prepared to support and pay higher taxes based on the principle of ability to pay to make a reality of our recommendations, and over 80, I think in fact over 90% of the members supported that. And the other thing the members did was they drafted an open letter to the Oireachtas, which was in their own words, kind of putting the recommendations into context. And we actually recorded another video of the members reading their open letter. That's how we will show you a few more of our members, and it's also on the website, so it's worth checking out if you're interested in that. One final thing that the researcher always are interested in is the extent to which being on the Citizens Assembly might have changed people's minds about the topic in question. And I suppose overall, in looking, one of the questions the researchers asked was for people to kind of rate on a scale whether their mind had changed on gender equality, from 1, which was no change, to 10, which is complete change, and the average was 5.8. So, I mean, there was a sort of a certain incremental change in people, and for 6 members, they said they completely changed their mind, so they would have selected 10. So that was quite interesting. And one of the topics that the members were also asked whether they agreed or disagreed with particular statements. And one was, I consider myself a feminist. And that was one where there was quite a strong change as the process evolved. So that's, a lot of that information is in Jane Souter's report, which is worth checking out if you're interested in that. So what happened next? Well, the report, there was 2, so there's 2 reports. There was the report of the Assembly itself and the chair, and that was submitted to the Oireachtas in June 2021. And as I mentioned, there's the other independent report from the researcher, just kind of evaluating the process. So the original resolution had said that an Oireachtas committee would be established to consider the recommendations, and that's now been established. It's being chaired by Ivana Bacik, and it had its first public hearing in March, and it's going to report within 9 months of that first public meeting. And then the government has said and has committed that it will respond to each recommendation. Now, it's important to stress that that doesn't mean that it's going to implement each recommendation. It just has to say whether it will or whether it won't. So that's where things are at the moment in relation to our assembly. And then I just mentioned at the opening that actually there's some new assemblies just up and running. So the current programme for government committed to 4 citizens' assemblies, 4 different topics, Lord Mayor for Dublin, drugs policy, the future of education, and biodiversity. And 2 of those 4 actually have been up and running and just had their first inaugural meeting on Saturday, as it happens. And one of the things based on, there's a number of recommendations that the chair made in her report, similar to the last chair, about, ways, lessons we had learned. And one was that we felt there should be a new approach to member selection. I think we all felt that there could have been a more diverse membership in terms of, for example, ethnicity, also more members with disabilities, more members perhaps from the travelling community. And it was felt that the door-to-door method doesn't really lend itself to that kind of diversity. So the new approach is one that's been followed generally internationally, and they used the Geo directory to send letters to a number of households. For the Dublin Mayor Assembly, 14,000 letters to randomly selected addresses, and for the Biodiversity Assembly, 20,000 letters were sent asking people, do they want to volunteer to be members? And the other change was that members were no longer required to be eligible to vote in a referendum. So that's the approach they've used for this assembly, and they had, I think, from what I've seen, 3,700 responses. And from that, then they were able to select members based on these various socio-demographic variables to try and get as much of a balance as possible. Just to mention, the one in Dublin has gone back to the Constitutional Convention approach. So it's 67 members of the public, but also 12 councillors. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. Similar to the Constitutional Convention. The Biodiversity Assembly is 99 citizens, and the chair, Jim Gavin, is chairing the Dublin Assembly, and Evie Sullivan is chairing the Biodiversity Assembly. So I'm kind of on the outside this time. I'm not responsible for it, so it'll be particularly interesting to see how it goes without having to worry about all the logistics and the technicalities of it. So I think I'm going to finish there. There's a lot of information on the website under this is the assembly for all the website for all the assemblies. So the previous assemblies are there, and you can see videos of our meeting, transcripts, kind of presentations that were presented at the report and so on. So if you're interested in further information, that's where you'll find it. So I'm very happy now to take questions or join a discussion.